name's Abby. I'm 25 and I live in T-Bay in Cumbria. I am currently studying for a Diploma of Higher Education in Arts and Cultural Leadership, kind of, with the University of Cumbria and the Braithwaite Trust. And I'm also a historical interpreter and costume designer, and do that mostly as a hobby, but would like to make it into more than just a hobby.
Tell us about how you first got into historical sewing and costumery.
It actually started when I was like, I don't know, 11 or 12, I think. I got really into the Victorians, just in general, and I decided that I wanted to, for my birthday, have a Victorian day in which we'd all dress up and carry out Victorian activities, and that for that I needed an outfit, and so I was like, well, I might as well make it myself. So I made my very first bustle dress, which is hanging up just over there. And I had it was really good because I had a family friend helping me, so I bought a commercial pattern for it, and then she kind of helped me learn how to read a pattern and how to transfer that knowledge into the actual making, and then from there, kind of over the course of my teenagehood and into my early 20s, I just sort of developed making other things from other eras, other centuries, and I'm now at the point where generally I will draft something myself rather than initially, turning to an existing pattern, unless it's something really hard that I've never made before. But yeah, and the interesting thing is that because that dress was basically my first proper sewing project, I've learned how to sew by sewing historical costumes, which means that when I try and sew modern clothes, I actually find it harder than I do to, make a fully boned bodice. Recently, I've been really getting into hand sewing and learning my historical stitches and trying to bring my costumery away from, I guess, costume and more into clothing, into making things that are durable and wearable and that reflect what could have been worn as much as possible.
Fantastic. I think it's really interesting as well that you got interested in Victorians at a young age. I know when I was in primary school, we had Victorian days and stuff like that. Did you feel like that did you have anything at school that sort of pushed you in that direction, or was it completely sort of on your own that you discovered it?
I can't remember if it was school. There were definitely some trips to museums where I got to dress up, and the little frilly cap and apron that they have to just dress up in. But actually it was reading, there's a series called What Katie Did and What Katie Did at School. It's set in America in the 19th century. It's basically about this girl who goes away to boarding school, and that was, I guess, the catalyst into I read a whole slew of books that were about Queen Victorian girls going about their lives, and I was like, I want to be one. I still have the folder on my computer of all the research I did when I was 12 around etiquette and dinner and everything.
We've noticed you're passionate about historical interpretation, so could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, of course. So historical interpretation, I'll just explain what it is, because it's quite a niche thing that's only really in recent years become more kind of common. People are more commonly aware of it. Mm-hmm. And it is basically the idea that history can be made a lot more accessible by bringing it to life through performance and through interacting with people and through interpretation, which has a broad range of meanings, but in this case it kind of fits into that living history type of thing where, for example, you would go to Beamish, and there would be people walking around in Victorian or whatever clothing, and you could go up to them, ask them about their lives in the mines or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the idea that by kind of seeing a real life person who is living that life, it actually brings it a lot closer to what our own experience. So I'm really interested in that, and I'm really interested in using it as a way to kind of connect with people who might otherwise not be particularly interested in the Victorian. I also think it's just a really cool way of doing a performance. So I have not professional or anything, but I have a background in acting and theatre, and historical interpretation kind of marries my interests in social history, you know, domestic history of everyday lives, especially women and rural women, marries really well with performance in historical interpretation. That's kind of one of my biggest passions, I guess, and that's one, like, the main area I would like to kind of go into and explore, because it is still very small.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Crickhollow Creative then, and sort of what services you sort of provide and how you sort of decided to just set it up, really.
Yeah, so it started as Crickhollow Costumes, which is just sort of me posting about my costumes or whatever. And I did have a brief period when I was like, oh, maybe I can do costume commissions. But I just think that, I mean, I've done costumes for plays I've been in before, and to a deadline, and, you know, to specific requirements. And it's pretty stressful. So I've decided to, as much as possible, keep the costume part of it as a sort of hobby, and then, as required, make costumes for interpretations. So what I would like to be able to do is to work with schools, museums, events, you know, like country houses, that kind of thing, and basically help them think about how they can make their historical education more exciting to people, and also really draw from local heritage. So one of the things I'm really interested in is, like I said before, like the lives of rural women, especially in Cumbria. You know, we look at like all sorts of, if we look at like the 18th century, you know, rural life, it's kind of got this very idyllic, pastoral, like you can pick flowers and you're wearing a lovely dress, and like I feel like there's a lot more to it than just that. You know?
Absolutely,
and a lot of people in this community in particular who live in this rural area, I think, would actually be able to relate to some of the issues facing people, you know, 100, 200, 300 years ago. And there's some really interesting discussions to be had around, particularly, it kind of draws it more into the historical costuming part, because one of the things I'm really interested in is like the historical, like the approach that we used to have to clothing and textiles as something valuable, something that so much work and effort went into, and how, as the Industrial Revolution happened, and how, you know, with the rise of capitalism, fast fashion has taken over. And I think that there's a real potential to have some really interesting discussions and kind of connect people with their clothing and with what they're wearing and that kind of thing through the lens of historical interpretation and historical sewing, looking at like someone who lived in a farm in 18th century Cumbria, who would have had to spin, dye and weave the wool herself that she was wearing, and how much value that then inherently has to the wearer, and doing some really interesting workshops around, you know, doing some of those kind of skills as part of them, but doing those kinds of skills and using them as a sort of starting point for discussions around the kind of fashion industry as a whole, and fast fashion and consumerism and the planet and sustainability. It all ties together.
So kind of like on that note, I guess, what does historical costumery and sewing mean to you, and what effect has it had on your life?
Yeah, so well, like I said, you know, it's kind of really made me aware of what goes into clothing and what goes into fabric and the whole textile industry. It's made me appreciate the kind of making process a lot more. Quite a lot of the time I will just make a costume just for the sake of having the costume, rather than for a specific event, for a specific play or whatever. It's just because I'm really interested in the making process of it. And I think through that I've kind of learnt to really appreciate, you know, all the learning that you can do through just trying things out. You know, just giving it a go. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, you try again. But also, like, one of the biggest effects it's had on me is that I don't really buy new clothes anymore. I mean, if I need like a replacement item, I'll like buy it from a charity shop or whatever. But I've been really getting into making my own clothing. It's changed my style from you know, general casual wear to I wear much more vintage style clothing now. Which doesn't necessarily have to happen when you become a historical costumer, but a lot of people who do historical costuming do have a slight vintage style. And I feel like it's kind of really given me a confidence boost in knowing that I have a really usable skill that not only comes in handy in like making your own clothes, but in all sorts of other things as well. And I think the kind of skills that you learn through that process of taking something from an idea, a drawing, to all the way through to a finished garment is something that can be applied to all sorts of things, you know, like work projects and events and that kind of thing.
What sort of advice would you give to someone either looking into getting into sewing or historical sewing?
There is a lot that can be done by hand if you don't have a sewing machine. Yes, it takes longer, but you know, I quite often will just sit and sew while like watching YouTube or Netflix, or like I play Dungeons and Dragons, and that's a really good time to do hand sewing because you're just listening mostly. And so don't be put off by not having a sewing machine. They're great and they're really useful, but everything before 1856 was made without a sewing machine. So particularly if you're interested in getting into historical sewing, you know, like the 18th century, I'm making an 18th century project at the moment, and pretty much all the fabric shapes and pattern pieces in 18th century clothing are like squares and rectangles, because they didn't want to waste any fabric by having like weird curved offcuts. So 18th century, like basic like shifts and skirts and aprons are a really good starting place because they're all hand sewn and they're all just really nice simple shapes. Another thing I would say that has helped me and improved my sewing practice immensely has been watching other people making historical costumes. Obviously I live in Cumbria, there aren't that many of us around here that do it, but the YouTube has a really good historical costuming community, and I've learnt so much just from watching them and their processes, and not only in kind of the technique process, but also all of the kind of fashion history that goes with it, and the like discussions. Like there's a really interesting whole discussion around like corsets, and are they really the kind of horrible oppressive things that we like to paint them as? Like no, they're not. And kind of that idea of people opening up that discussion, and it informs your creation a lot when you're making it as well, because you know more about what you're making. So definitely get on YouTube. And also patterns are really handy. You know, there's a lot of commercial, like my first sewing project was with a commercial historical dress pattern, and while it's maybe not the most historical accurate thing I've ever made, it was a good pattern. It showed me all the ways to do things. And yeah, just give it a go.
What future plans do you have for Crickhollow Costumes and of course yourself?
I mean, one of the biggest things with lockdown has been over the past year that like it's really affected my motivation with sewing, which has been really annoying. I was like, a whole year off, I'd be able to get so much done, but I didn't. So I guess one of my biggest things that I want to do is just get started again. And I have, like I said, I'm making this 18th century project. Been making like more pairs of trousers of my own to wear, you know, on a daily basis. But I'm really hoping that the course that I'm currently doing, which is in Arts and Cultural Leadership and Social Enterprise Leadership, is really focused towards starting your own business, your own social enterprise, you know, looking at particularly the opportunities available in Cumbria to young artists. I would really like to see a really strong young creatives network in Cumbria that we're all collaborating together. Crickhollow Costumes hopefully being part of that. And I would just I just want to get out there and, you know, start doing some proper historical interpretation. So yeah, I'm really hoping that my course will kind of give me that boost that I need to get that going, and to turn it into something that I hope can really not only entertain but also educate people, and be full of beautiful costumes.
Absolutely. I was thinking as well, do you have a favourite costume you've put together, like at all, or like a favourite?
I think so. I've got a really nice Tudor dress. Would you like me to show it to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I would love that.
The desk behind me is a bit messy when I move. I apologise.
It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. I'm the same.
Here she is. She's very large and you can't really see the shape of it properly. This is a dress that I made when I was 18, I think.
Oh wow.
It's not made of historically accurate fabrics, so like if you're getting started, don't worry, you can cheat it. This is like upholstery fabric, this is curtain fabric, these are all plastic. But it looks, I can't really put it on because it's too big. It looks really good when it's on, and it's got these little undersleeves that go underneath.
It's fantastic. Oh, it's so stunning. It's actually fantastic. I'm such a nerd for like Jane Austen was my thing at uni. So like I grew up watching Emma and like Pride and Prejudice.
The bonnet that you can see up there, that's a Regency bonnet. Making an enormous 1860s ball gown, which also was one of the things that was sadly not axed, but put very far on the back burner by lockdown when I lost all sewing motivation. But I think once that's done, that will be kind of my main, beautiful thing to show off to people. Yeah. It's a very wide skirt.